You have crossed the line this time, Kofi. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?
Hello friend, this is Jam Fireside Folktales. Please subscribe, like and share. Let's delve deep into the story. Thank you.
In the wealthy, sprawling hills of East Legan in Accra, the Mensah family name carried a heavy, undeniable power. They had built generations of massive business empires and held political connections that could open any door. They commanded a level of respect that mere money could never buy. At the center of this powerful dynasty was their only son, Kofi Mensah. He was a striking 24-year-old West African man who stood at 6 feet and 1 inch tall. Kofi possessed a lean, athletic muscularity and beautiful obsidian black skin with a flawless matte finish. He kept his hair in a neat, 0.5 grade faded buzz cut with a remarkably crisp, natural hairline. His strong jawline and intense brown eyes gave him a commanding presence, perfectly balanced by a straight, noble nose. Everyone expected him to marry the daughter of a prominent politician or a wealthy CEO to merge empires and consolidate their high status. The entire city of Accra waited eagerly for the announcement of his inevitable high society wedding. He was the ultimate prize, the golden boy of a family that never accepted anything less than perfection. And then, the proud and flawless Kofi Mensah did the absolute unthinkable, shocking everyone who knew his family's grand legacy. He chose to marry a poor, unknown seamstress who worked from a dusty, rusted roadside kiosk deep in the chaotic heart of Makola Market. Her name was simply Amma. She spent her long, exhausting days stitching torn school uniforms and resizing second-hand dresses under the shade of a faded, weather-beaten umbrella. The harsh sun beat down on her small workspace, yet she worked tirelessly, her hands moving with practiced grace. Amma owned absolutely no gold jewelry to display on her wrists. She possessed no plots of valuable land in the city or the countryside. She had no famous surname to open doors for her in high society. She was entirely invisible to the elite world that Kofi inhabited so comfortably. What she did have, however, was a quiet, unshakable dignity. She carried herself with a proud posture despite her humble surroundings. Her dark eyes held deep, hidden stories that she never told anyone, a silent resilience that spoke louder than any spoken words. While the wealthy women of East Legan flaunted designer bags and imported shoes, Amma found quiet strength in her worn sandals and calloused fingers. She was the absolute opposite of everything the wealthy Mensah family valued, respected, and expected for their son. Their paths crossed on a noisy, crowded afternoon when Kofi's luxury car broke down near the bustling edge of Makola Market. While his driver frantically called for a mechanic, Kofi sought shade from the blistering heat beneath Amma's faded umbrella. He expected the poor seamstress to act flustered, to offer him a seat out of awe for his expensive clothes and obvious wealth. Instead, Amma barely glanced up from the torn school uniform she was diligently mending. She simply pointed to a wobbly wooden stool and told him he could sit if he stayed out of her light. Kofi was instantly captivated. He was so used to people bowing to his surname and begging for his attention that her utter indifference fascinated him. Over the next few months, he returned to that dusty kiosk repeatedly. He bought her lunch, sat on that wobbly stool, and watched her work. He believed he was falling deeply in love with her simple, honest life. He admired her quiet strength, her unwavering focus, and the way she never asked him for a single sadi. In Kofi's eyes, this poor market seamstress was more valuable and authentic than any wealthy heiress he had ever met. When Kofi finally gathered the courage to tell his family about his intentions, the reaction was catastrophic. They were gathered in the massive, air-conditioned living room of their East Legan mansion when he casually announced that he was going to marry Amma, the seamstress from Makola. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Then, his mother reacted with explosive drama. She threw her hands in the air and wept loudly, wailing as if someone had just announced a death in the family. She paced across the imported marble floor, crying about how her only son was destroying their flawless reputation. She called her wealthy friends on the phone, publicly weeping and mourning the end of the Mensa dynasty. She refused to eat for 2 whole days, claiming the sheer shame of the situation was making her physically ill. The servants walked around the mansion on their tiptoes, terrified of triggering another outburst. Kofi's mother could not fathom how a boy raised in luxury, surrounded by the finest things the world had to offer, could willingly choose the dirt and poverty of the market. She prayed constantly, hoping this was just a horrible nightmare that would eventually fade away into nothingness. While Kofi's mother relied on tears and dramatic public weeping to express her sheer devastation, his powerful father chose a completely different weapon: absolute, terrifying rage. Mr. Mensa was a man who commanded boardrooms and terrified business rivals with a single look. When he heard about Alma, his face hardened into stone. He summoned Kofi to his private study, slamming the heavy mahogany door shut. He demanded that Kofi end the ridiculous relationship immediately, threatening to cut him off from the family wealth, the businesses, and the inheritance. Kofi, standing tall with his intense brown eyes locked onto his father's furious gaze, firmly refused to back down. He stated calmly that he was marrying Alma, with or without the family's blessing. Furious and deeply insulted by this blatant defiance, the patriarch made a swift, brutal decision. He flatly refused to attend the traditional engagement ceremony. In Ghanaian culture, a father's absence at a knocking or engagement ceremony is a massive, highly visible sign of profound disrespect and rejection. It was his way of telling the entire city that he did not recognize the union, hoping the public humiliation would force the poor seamstress to pack her bags and disappear. With the father refusing to participate and the mother constantly crying, the extended family quickly filled the void with vicious gossip. Kofi's aunties, wealthy women draped in expensive lace and heavy gold chains, descended upon the mansion like a flock of angry birds. They sat in the plush living rooms, drinking imported tea and whispering cruel theories about the unknown girl from Akola. They loudly declared that Alma must have used powerful, dark magic to trap their golden boy. They claimed she had visited a wicked shrine to bind Kofi's mind, making him blind to her poverty and lack of class. "She has trapped him," the eldest auntie hissed over her teacup, rolling her eyes in absolute disgust. Why else would a boy who has tasted expensive wine suddenly want to drink dirty water? They scrutinized every detail they could find about Alma, mocking her cheap clothes, her humble background, and her lack of education. They warned Kofi's mother that the seamstress was only coming into their grand house to steal their wealth and run away. The aunties made it their personal mission to ensure that Alma would never, ever feel welcome or comfortable within the wealthy walls of the mighty Mensa family. Despite the raging storm of insults, threats, and endless tears from his family, Kofi stood like a solid rock. He fiercely defended the poor seamstress against every cruel word his aunties threw at her. When they accused her of wanting his money, Kofi calmly reminded them that Alma had never once asked him for a single coin. When they called her uneducated and low-class, he praised her incredible work ethic and the honest, quiet dignity she displayed every single day in the blistering heat. He told his weeping mother that he loved Alma's profound kindness, a trait he found lacking in the wealthy circles they navigated. He deeply admired her inner strength, marveling at how she survived in a harsh world without ever begging for attention or pity. Kofi was totally convinced that he had found a rare, pure gem hidden in the dust of the city. He proudly declared to his angry family that Alma's pure heart was worth more than all the bank accounts and political connections they possessed. He believed his love for her was a brave, noble rebellion against a shallow society that only valued material wealth, fancy surnames, and superficial appearances above true, genuine human connection. The day of the traditional engagement finally arrived, but it was overshadowed by a heavy, dark cloud of tension. True to his stubborn word, Kofi's powerful father was nowhere to be found. His absence was a glaring, embarrassing hole in the proceedings. Kofi's uncles had to step in to perform the customary rites, their faces tight with quiet disapproval. The ceremony took place at a modest, rented venue, completely lacking the grand, extravagant displays typical of a Mensa family celebration. Alma sat quietly in her traditional Kent cloth, her expression calm and unreadable. She did not smile much, nor did she look intimidated by the wealthy relatives glaring at her from across the room. Kofi held her hand tightly, trying to project strength and unity to the whispering crowd. The aunties sat together in a corner, judging the cheap decorations and the simple food provided by Alma's humble representatives. The air in the room was suffocating, filled with fake pleasantries and forced handshakes. Everyone present knew the powerful patriarch had boycotted the union. They all assumed Alma must be feeling a deep, crushing sense of shame, but the poor seamstress simply looked straight ahead, her dark eyes glowing with a strange, quiet resolve. After the tense, awkward engagement, the families suddenly changed their strategy for the white wedding. If they could not stop the marriage, they decided they would at least use the event to showcase their immense power. The Mensa family took complete control of the wedding planning, pushing Alma and her simple wishes entirely to the side. They wanted to prove to the whole city of Accra that they were still superior, despite the groom's questionable choice of a bride. They booked the most expensive, luxurious hotel in the city for the reception. They ordered thousands of exotic flowers, hired a famous live band, and sent gold-embossed invitations to politicians, diplomats, and wealthy business moguls. The grand wedding was not a celebration of Kofi and Alma's love. It was a desperate, flashy attempt to distract the public from the bride's extreme poverty. The mother dried her tears and focused on showing off her expensive jewelry, determined to outshine the poor seamstress. They bought Alma a designer gown, treating her like a simple mannequin they could dress up to hide her Makola roots. The family wanted to blind their rich guests with so much luxury that no one would dare question their social dominance. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, unfolding exactly as the wealthy family had meticulously planned. The grand cathedral was packed to the brim with high society guests dressed in their absolute best. Expensive luxury cars lined the streets outside, and security guards stood at every entrance. As Kofi stood at the altar, looking incredibly sharp in his custom-tailored suit, cameras flashed incessantly from every direction. When Alma finally walked down the long, heavily decorated aisle, the entire congregation held its breath. She looked beautiful in the expensive lace gown the family had forced upon her, but the atmosphere was thick with heavy judgment. Guests murmured quietly behind their programs, whispering about the poor market girl who had hit the ultimate jackpot. Smiles across the front pews were entirely forced, stretching tight across uncomfortable faces. Kofi's mother sat rigidly, looking like she was attending a funeral rather than a celebration. Despite the overwhelming luxury, the flashing lights, and the heavy stares of Accra's elite, the bride did not tremble or look away. She walked steadily toward the man waiting for her, hiding a massive secret beneath the layers of white silk and tulle that trailed slowly behind her on the floor. Throughout the long, exhausting ceremony, observant guests noticed something incredibly peculiar about the bride. Given her background as a poor, unknown seamstress, everyone expected Alma to look overwhelmed, nervous, or perhaps overly excited by the massive display of wealth. Instead, Alma remained calm. In fact, she was far too calm. When she recited her solemn vows, her voice did not shake even a fraction of an inch. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, she did not display the joyful, tearful relief that usually accompanied such a miraculous change in fortune. Her dark, intense eyes scanned the wealthy crowd, briefly lingering on Kofi's father, who sat in the front row looking completely miserable and trapped. While Kofi smiled brightly, overjoyed that he had successfully fought his family and won his bride, Alma's face remained a perfectly smooth, unreadable mask. She accepted the forced hugs from the aunties and the fake congratulations from the politicians with cold, polite nods. There was a strange, unsettling coldness to her demeanor that completely contradicted the image of a humble, grateful girl rescued from poverty. She moved through the grand, chaotic day like a soldier carefully executing the final stages of a highly classified mission. The reception was a blinding display of excessive wealth and absolute arrogance. Massive crystal chandeliers hung above tables covered in imported silk and fine china. Waiters in crisp white uniforms poured expensive champagne into tall glasses, while the elite guests ate decadent food and networked. Alma sat silently at the grand high table beside Kofi, watching the Mensa family desperately attempt to maintain their glorious image. Kofi's mother laughed loudly with the senator's wife, completely ignoring her new daughter-in-law. The aunties gathered near the towering wedding cake, casting nasty, sideways glances at the bride and whispering behind their manicured hands. They clearly thought they had successfully buried Alma's poverty under their immense wealth. They assumed they had bought her silence and compliance with the expensive gown she wore and the lavish food she was eating. Kofi squeezed her hand under the table, totally oblivious to the real reason behind her chilling silence. He thought she was just tired from the massive crowd and the long, stressful day. He eagerly whispered in her ear about the beautiful future they would build together, completely unaware that the foundation of his entire life was about to be violently ripped away in just a few short hours. When the loud, extravagant reception finally ended late in the evening, the newlyweds were escorted to their marital suite. The Mensa family, always eager to display their wealth, had prepared a lavish, sprawling bedroom in a highly exclusive five-star hotel for the wedding night. The massive room was heavily decorated with fresh, sweet-smelling rose petals scattered across the thick carpet and the huge king-sized bed. Expensive, chilled champagne waited in a silver bucket near the balcony window, which offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the glittering Accra skyline. Soft, romantic music played quietly from hidden speakers in the ceiling. It was the absolute picture of romance, wealth, and a perfect happily ever after. Kofi walked into the luxurious suite feeling an overwhelming sense of victory. He had successfully fought his powerful family, ignored the harsh rumors, and finally married the woman of his dreams. He turned around to look at his beautiful new bride, expecting her to finally drop her guarded behavior and smile at the wonderful life waiting for them. He thought the hard part was finally over. He truly believed they were safe now. But as the heavy wooden door clicked shut, the real nightmare officially began in the quiet room. That night, inside the lavish bedroom prepared by the arrogant Mensa family, something happened that absolutely no one could have ever expected. Before Kofi could even reach up to remove his tailored suit jacket, Alma moved with shocking speed and sudden purpose. She walked straight past him, ignoring the rose petals and the romantic music, and approached the heavy oak door. With a loud, sharp click that echoed loudly in the quiet suite, Alma firmly locked the door from the inside. She slid the heavy metal chain into place, ensuring no one could enter and neither of them could easily leave. Kofi chuckled softly, completely misinterpreting her sudden, decisive action. He thought she was simply eager to begin their life together, away from the prying eyes of his extremely judgmental family. He smiled warmly at her, his intense brown eyes reflecting the dim, romantic lighting of the room. He took a slow step forward, reaching out to gently hold her hands. But Alma stepped back, creating a cold, deliberate distance between them. The polite, quiet girl from the Makola market completely vanished. She stood tall, her posture rigid, her eyes burning with a dark, terrifying intensity that Kofi had never seen before. Alma looked directly into Kofi's eyes, her expression completely stripped of any affection or warmth. The silence in the lavish room grew incredibly heavy, suffocating the romantic music playing softly in the background. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and then she said the words that would violently shatter the powerful Mensa family forever. "I did not marry you for love," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a razor-sharp knife. The absolute certainty in her tone was chilling. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence filled the massive bedroom. Kofi froze completely. His hands dropped slowly to his sides. His warm smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. He blinked hard, trying to process the incredibly cruel sentence that had just left the lips of his new wife. He thought he must have misheard her. Perhaps it was a strange, inappropriate joke, or maybe the immense stress of the day had finally caused her to break down. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask her what she meant, but the terrifyingly cold, determined look in her dark eyes stopped the words dead in his throat. She was completely serious. Before Kofi could recover from the shocking blow of her words, Amma turned away from him. She walked deliberately toward the small, simple wedding purse she had carried all day, which now sat on a glass table. Kofi watched in stunned silence, his heart hammering wildly against his ribs as she slowly opened the small clasp. She bypassed her lipstick and a small mirror, reaching deep inside the lining of the purse. When she pulled her hand out, she was holding an old, badly worn photograph. The edges of the picture were frayed and crinkled, as if someone had held it tightly during hundreds of sleepless, tear-filled nights. The colors had faded into dull, sepia tones, hinting at the many long years that had passed since the picture was originally taken. Amma held the old photograph carefully by the corner, her fingers trembling just the slightest bit. She turned back to Kofi, her face a mask of deeply buried pain and long-awaited revenge. She took a few steps forward and slowly extended her arm, holding the fragile, faded piece of paper out for him to take. "Look at it," she commanded softly, her voice carrying a weight that demanded absolute obedience. Kofi hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mind screaming that whatever was on that paper would destroy him. With a shaking hand, he slowly reached out and took the old, worn photograph from her fingers. He held it up to the dim light of the crystal chandelier and squinted. The breath was instantly knocked out of his lungs. The picture showed a man and a woman standing close together, smiling brightly at the camera. The man was undeniably Kofi's father, looking much younger, handsome, and full of life, his signature arrogant smile plastered across his face. But the woman standing beside him, holding his hand intimately, was not Kofi's wealthy, dramatic mother. It was a much younger woman, wearing a simple, faded dress, but possessing a striking, beautiful face that Kofi instantly recognized. He looked up at Amma in horror, and then back down at the face in the picture. The resemblance was impossible to deny. They had the exact same dark, intense eyes and the same proud jawline. The woman in the faded photograph standing lovingly next to his powerful, wealthy father was none other than Amma's mother. The room suddenly began to spin violently around him. Amma's voice sliced through the heavy, suffocating silence of the room, sharp and completely merciless. "That was 25 years ago," she stated, her dark eyes locking onto his terrified face. "He promised her the entire world. He promised to marry her." She took a step closer, forcing Kofi to listen to the ugly, hidden truth of his prestigious family. But when she got pregnant, he panicked. He realized a poor village girl would ruin his perfect, wealthy reputation. Amma's voice trembled slightly with decades of suppressed rage. He gave her a handful of money and ordered her to disappear. When she refused to abort the child, he used his massive power to have her utterly disgraced and permanently thrown out of her village. Kofi stared at his new bride, absolute horror washing over him like a bucket of freezing water. The noble, highly respected patriarch of the Mensa family was a monster. Amma had grown up in miserable poverty, sewing torn clothes in a dusty Makola kiosk, not because of unfortunate fate or bad luck. She had suffered her entire life directly because of the Mensa family's dark, ugly secret. She was the forgotten collateral damage of their pristine, wealthy reputation. As the terrifying reality of her words crashed down upon him, Kofi's mind violently connected the final, horrific facts. He looked at the date scrawled on the back of the faded photograph, then calculated his own age. The math was devastatingly clear. The greatest, most sickening twist of the entire night struck him like a physical blow to the chest. Kofi and Amma were not strangers who had magically met by chance in the chaotic Makola market. They were not a romantic fairy tale of rich meeting poor. They were siblings. They shared the exact same father. They were half-blood. Amma watched the horrifying realization wash over Kofi's face, watching him stumble backward until his knees hit the edge of the lavish bed. Her mother died 5 years ago in a dirty, public hospital. Amma whispered fiercely, tears finally pooling in her intense eyes. She died with one final request for me. One day, make them face the truth. Alma had carefully tracked him down. She had purposefully placed her kiosk where his car would break down. She had not come into this family for their money. She had endured the auntie's insults and the mother's tears because she had come for absolute justice. The next morning, the bright across sun rose over the wealthy hills of East Legon, completely ignorant of the catastrophic earthquake that had destroyed the Mensa family overnight. Before the servants could even serve breakfast, and before anyone could possibly stop her, Alma acted. She did not pack her bags and run away as the aunties had always predicted. Instead, she boldly marched back to the grand family mansion. With a chilling, absolute authority, she called an emergency family meeting in the massive, main living room. Kofi followed silently behind her, his face pale and his eyes hollow, looking like a ghost haunting his own home. The mother, the father, and the gossiping aunties gathered in the room, highly annoyed and deeply confused by the poor seamstress issuing orders in their house. Kofi's father glared at her, demanding to know the meaning of this extreme disrespect on the morning after the wedding. Alma stood perfectly straight in the center of the imported marble floor. She did not flinch under their angry, judgmental stares. She held the old, faded photograph tightly in her hand, completely ready to detonate the bomb that would burn the massive Mensa empire straight to the ground. The explosion was instantaneous and utterly destructive. With trembling hands but a remarkably steady, powerful voice, Alma revealed absolutely everything to the arrogant room. She threw the faded photograph onto the expensive glass coffee table, directly in front of the powerful patriarch. She loudly announced the dates, matching them perfectly to the timeline of his early marriage. She spoke of the abandoned child left to rot in the slums while the Mensa family built their glittering empire. The horrific truth echoed off the high ceilings, shattering the pristine, wealthy illusion they had carefully maintained for decades. The silence that instantly followed her revelation was not peaceful. It was the terrifying vacuum before a massive blast. No one could speak. The undeniable facial resemblance between Alma and the powerful man sitting stiffly on the sofa was suddenly glaringly obvious to everyone in the room. The dark secret that had been buried in the dirt of a distant village 25 years ago had proudly marched into their luxurious living room and demanded to be recognized. Alma stood tall, looking directly into the terrified eyes of the father who had thrown her away like garbage, finally delivering the devastating justice her dying mother had begged for. The reaction from the proud, wealthy family was absolute, uncontrolled chaos. Upon hearing the disgusting truth that her only son had just married his own half-sister, Kofi's dramatic mother let out a blood-curdling shriek and immediately collapsed onto the marble floor in a state of severe shock. The aunties, who had spent months viciously mocking Alma's poverty, jumped up from their plush seats, screaming loudly about betrayal and demonic curses. They clutched their expensive lace dresses, completely horrified by the massive abomination that had just taken place under their roof. But the most dramatic reaction came from the mighty Mr. Mensa himself. The terrifying business tycoon, who always controlled every situation, turned completely pale. His arrogant mask crumbled into pieces, leaving behind a terrified, guilty old man. He stared at the photograph on the table, his hands shaking violently, unable to utter a single word of defense. The massive, golden empire built so carefully on reputation, respect, and political connections cracked wide open in a single, devastating hour. The flawless, untouchable Mensa dynasty was instantly reduced to a weeping, screaming, broken mess of dark secrets and unimaginable shame. Alma watched them panic, feeling a deep, quiet sense of absolute completion. In the frantic, chaotic days that followed the explosive family meeting, secret medical professionals were immediately rushed into the mansion. Urgent DNA tests were quickly conducted, and the scientific results swiftly confirmed the horrifying truth. The probability of paternity was 99.9%. The grand, $1 million white wedding was instantly declared legally and morally invalid. Despite the family's frantic, expensive attempts to bribe officials and silence the staff, a secret like this was simply too massive to contain. The scandalous story inevitably leaked to the eager press in Accra within a matter of days. Local newspapers printed massive headlines, and greedy blogs feasted on the juicy details. The mighty Mensah family name aggressively trended across all social media platforms for weeks, completely destroying their pristine public reputation. People in the markets and the high society clubs eagerly gossiped about the arrogant billionaire whose discarded secret child returned to unknowingly marry his golden son. The political allies stopped calling, and the business partners quickly distanced themselves from the toxic fallout. The family that had brutally judged a poor seamstress for lacking class was now the absolute laughingstock of the entire country, completely ruined by their own dark, deeply hidden arrogance. But here is the incredible, emotional punch that made the tragic story truly go viral across the nation. Kofi did not hate Amma for destroying his entire life. When the dust finally settled in the empty, quiet mansion, he sought her out. He did not yell at her or accuse her of ruining his family's grand legacy. He looked at the incredible pain she had carried her entire life, a pain caused by his own father's extreme cowardice. Standing before the woman he had briefly called his wife, Kofi bowed his head and sincerely apologized. He did not apologize as a heartbroken husband, but as a deeply sorrowful brother. He apologized for the 25 years of poverty she endured while he lived in massive luxury. He apologized for the auntie's cruel insults and his mother's blind arrogance. He realized that Amma's unbelievable strength and quiet dignity, the very things he had admired in the Makola market, were forged in the fire of his father's cruel abandonment. Kofi chose to reject the toxic pride of his wealthy upbringing and completely embrace the broken, incredibly brave sister standing in front of him. In that powerful moment, true healing finally began. Together, the two siblings did something absolutely no one in the country expected, completely flipping the scandalous narrative. Instead of hiding in shame, Kofi and Amma publicly teamed up. Using a team of ruthless lawyers, they successfully sued their own father for decades of severe emotional distress and child abandonment. They forcefully took control of a massive portion of the Mensah family wealth. But they did not keep the millions for themselves. They aggressively donated the vast majority of the recovered funds to local charities that specifically supported abandoned single mothers and struggling children in the slums of Accra. They built new sewing centers and schools, ensuring that no other poor girl in the dusty market would ever be treated like disposable garbage by powerful men. They completely stripped the Mensah name of its toxic arrogance and rebuilt it from the ground up, not on a foundation of wealthy silence and dark secrets, but on loud, undeniable truth and radical compassion. The seamstress, who was heavily mocked for bringing no gold to the wealthy family, ended up giving them the most valuable thing they had ever possessed, a painful, necessary, and ultimately beautiful redemption.